Good evening, everybody out in community TV land in Manchester, Auburn, Hooksett. That's the progress report. We have reached almost the middle of June. It is indeed June 14th, which is Flag Day. Flag Day, and of those of you who did not get a chance to see it somewhere else, you will be seeing pictures. Brady Sullivan arranged to have a new gigantic flag put up on the Mill West building right across the river from us over at the corner of Bridge and McGregor Street, right across from the St. Mary's Bank principal office, and facing to the east. And what a glorious day it was to see that gigantic flag. This one was not made by workers at the Amoskeag Mills.
It was a big flag, though.
It was a big flag.
I saw the picture up on the Union Leaders website.
It looked absolutely glorious, and John Clayton, who knows everything about Manchester history, or at least as much as anybody else, told the history of the original flag and the mystery of what happened to it. The original flag was displayed on a mill building in 1914. I forget the exact date, but made by the mill workers at the Amoskeag. And of course, at that time, it had 48 stars. That was in 1914. If it had been 1911, it would have been 46.
Yep.
The last two states in the contiguous 48 were admitted in 1912.
May I interrupt and interject that in Manchester, at the old St. Joseph Cemetery, there is a memorial to the Sheridan Guard, which is the originator of the New Hampshire National Guard. And that flag that they fly there is a 46-star flag, in keeping with the historical nature of the location.
How about that? Well, there you go. John Clayton's attempted to find out what happened to the original gigantic flag that covered, 4 stories and 36 windows of the Amoskeag Mill building. And it ended up in Chicago at Marshall Fields, apparently.
Oh, no kidding.
But nobody knows what actually happened to it after it was there. The feeling is that maybe when the last 2 stars were added, I think in 1961 for Hawaii and Alaska, 1950, 61?
59, I think.
59?
Yep.
I thought it was in the, yeah.
I was born in 59, so I think...
You remember they admitted...
I was there when it happened.
They admitted 2 new states in honor of your birth. So there's a little mystery what happened to the original flag, but this flag recalled a great part of New Hampshire history and Manchester history, and it was just a nice thing.
I wish they had. I'm sure they did advertise it, but I have to confess I did not hear about that. I would have liked to have been part of that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have probably gone except somebody called me and told me, come on down. And of course, there were many dignitaries there, and it was a nice event, and there was a good crowd, and there were certainly good feelings there. Anyway, that. Today is Flag Day, so we all had a chance to honor our flag in some way. With the city of Manchester, had a wonderful chance to honor our flag by putting out the biggest one anybody's ever seen around here, unless you were alive in 1914 and saw the one that the mill workers made. So tonight we were expecting to have the retiring or maybe retired executive director of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, David Preece. Maybe he's delayed. I don't know, but we hope he'll show up, because that was our plan for the hour, was to talk to him about what he's seen in his many years of the director of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission, where he thinks he's had some successes, where he's had some disappointments. But I'm not sure whether something happened or not, but he's not here.
What are we going to do, Bob, if he doesn't come in? Do you think we'll be at a loss for words?
I don't think we'll be at a loss of words. There's a hell of a lot
happening. We'll have to call on our viewers. Maybe they can call in and help us out, suggest some topics.
Yeah, and we would really welcome that, folks. We really appreciate our callers. It's 640-3091, and I hope you'll call in. We've had big doings at the state level, at the city level, but I guess maybe before we get onto the POTUS on the progress, we should just acknowledge the terrible tragedy down in Alexandria, Virginia this morning, with the critical wounding of a U.S. congressman by a lone, what we think is a lone gunman armed with apparently a pistol and a rifle. I'm sure you've all been seeing this in the news, because it's been kind of blanket coverage nonstop ever since the press learned of this horror down there. And we all think this is just ridiculous. But I always hope that something good come out of this, more than just saying our hearts go out and our prayers are with. Those routines, everything everybody says when there's a tragedy like this. They have a congressman critically wounded, 2 Capitol police officers, I guess, grievously wounded, and there was, I guess, a bystander wounded too, or some observer or something, and then, of course, the shooter critically wounded and died at the hospital. 5 fatalities in this, including the shooter. And I just got to say it, Mike, and I know you agree with me. The thing that distresses me about this is every time this happens, and it happens, and it happens, and it happens, and it happens, the answer to gun violence suggested by so many folks is more guns. If only we had more guns. If only the person that was shot had been armed, or the person standing next to him been armed. If we all had more guns, we'd be safer. It just doesn't compute. It just doesn't compute. And you made an excellent point about that one.
Well, the point that I made earlier is, I have actually 2 points on this. One, in the big picture, the United States of America has actually conducted that experiment. We have, per capita, more gun ownership, more gun availability than anywhere else in the world.
And if I'm not mistaken, second to us is the Philippines, which for a long time was an American colony in possession.
And you can look from that. We also have the most violent, the highest rates of gun violence in the world.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of good guys with guns, and yet we have the highest rate of gun violence. So the argument that a good guy with a gun will defeat a bad guy with a gun really doesn't line up with the statistics that we see in the big picture. And now let's take a look at what happened today. We had Capitol Police, whose duty it was to protect those congressmen who were there at that park, armed, trained, the people that I want to rely on to protect me from gun violence. I have to say, they're the people that I say should rely on it. They were there, certainly good guys with guns, and they were not able to prevent it. So the argument that a good guy with a gun can prevent a bad guy with a gun from doing damage, it just doesn't really fly, and those are the 2 points that I'd make on that. I also, while I have the floor, Bob, I want to say I watched Paul Ryan's speech on the House floor about the events of this morning, and I have never been more impressed with that gentleman. That was one of the best speeches I've ever heard any politician make. He reached out for unity. He reached out to Democrats. He acknowledged the arguments and the positions that Democrats take on the issue, and I have to say it was an absolutely one of the best political speeches I've probably heard in maybe 4 years.
Really? Well, I'm sorry I didn't hear
brief.
It. But I will look to see it because I'm sure it'll be
it was from the floor.
Available from the floor somewhere.
It was followed by Nancy Pelosi, who gave a very nice speech, but her speech paled in comparison. Paul Ryan really tuned into the situation, did a great job.
Well,
and
that's good.
I'm not a frequent admirer of him. But
no, not that I recall, but that's good to know. We should give credit where it's due. Sounds like it's well due here. So, Mike has favored us with something I look forward to every week, and I hope some of you viewing this show do too. He calls it the POTUS on the Progress.
The POTUS report on the progress report.
I can't get this right. The POTUS report on the progress report.
Because the word report is in there twice.
Yes.
But it's something we want to do, and I have one this week.
Let's go for it.
All right. I hope we're ready. We need a little technology here. We're doing it a little bit differently. We're just going to present a very short video, and this is this week's POTUS report on the progress report.
So I think what we'll do, most of you know most of the people around the room, but I'm going to start with our Vice President. Where is our Vice President? Our Vice President. There he is. And I'll maybe start with Mike, and we'll just go around and you name your position, and then we'll ask these folks to go back and have a good day, and we're going to discuss our various reports. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. President, and just the greatest privilege of my life is to serve as Vice President to a President who's keeping his word to the American people and assembling a team that's bringing real change, real prosperity, real strength back to our nation.
Thank you, Mike.
Mr. President, it's a privilege to serve the students of this country, and to work to ensure that every child has an equal opportunity to get a great education and therefore a great future.
Thank you, Mike.
President, what an incredible honor it is to lead the Department of Health and Human Services at this pivotal time under your leadership. I can't thank you enough for the privilege that you've given me and the leadership that you've shown.
Mr. President, as your seal on your staff,
That's true.
and it's an honor to be your steward of our public lands and the generator of energy dominance. I am deeply honored, and I am committed and optimistic that we can be both great stewards and be the world's largest producer of energy.
Good. And you can do both. Thank you very much. Thanks. Rex?
Mr. President, thank you for the honor to serve the country. It's a great privilege you've given me. Clearly, we are engaged with our allies to ensure that they know where our common interests lie, what our expectations are, that America will continue to be a leader, but they must do more.
On behalf of the entire senior staff around you, Mr. President, we thank you for the opportunity and the blessing that you've given us to serve your agenda and the American people, and we're continuing to work very hard every day to accomplish those goals.
When I was watching this, I recalled a video I saw of historical footage. Actually, two came to mind. One was in Korea, where the politicians were standing up and pledging their loyalty to Kim Jong-un. It might have been Kim Jong-il, I forget, but in the same kind of language, pledging their loyalty as uniformed officers were pulling people out of their seats and taking them away, and we knew where they were going. So these people were pleading for their lives. And that's what this reminded me of. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I'm happy to see that they're happy in their jobs, and that's this week's POTUS report on the progress report. I have no words.
Well, you didn't include it, Mike, but maybe some of our viewers have seen that the minority leader in the New Hampshire and the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer of New York, had a meeting with his staff around a table, and they did the same thing. Oh, Mr. Schumer, we are so pleased that you enable us to serve you and your agenda. I mean, it was what can you say?
I was aware of that
What can
video,
you
Bob,
say?
but I didn't want to insult our viewers. I figured they could get it.
They got it. I'm sure they got it. I just try and imagine Lincoln's cabinet. The team of rivals in the famous book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, his political rivals, sitting around doing that. I just can't.
The idea that they felt they had to, I'm trying to figure out where does that come from.
Oh my gosh!
I've never seen that in a room full of adults. In my life, and I guess I certainly haven't been in a room like that one. But I've been in a few rooms, and I've never seen anything like that. And that's. And by the way, that was the first meeting of the full cabinet of the United States of America in this administration. That was
I guess we should say, in all fairness to the president, that there were apparently some members of the cabinet that did not follow that line, that actually talked about what their department was going to do. But
well, I boiled it down. I distilled it a little bit so that we could get it in with 2 minutes. But that was a lot of fun, I guess.
That is just absolutely hilarious.
And by the way, today is the president's 71st birthday.
71st birthday.
He's been on this planet 71 years.
Happy birthday, Mr. Trump, I guess.
You can say that.
I can say that. I guess we should. It's pretty distressing. Well, I still don't see any sign of David Priest, so let's talk about some other issues.
Live
here in the
TV
city.
without a net. First thing, before you get started, Bob, I want to call again, appeal to our listeners. Give us a call at 640-3091 and suggest your topics. There's a lot going on. We've got stuff in the city going on. We've got this national stuff, of course. And
The state budget is in
Bob,
the
you've got a
final
stack
stages.
of state papers, so I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about.
I guess we will. Let's get back to the issue of the state budget. I don't happen to serve on either the Finance or the Ways and Means Committee, and my, regular first Wednesday of the month co-host Lou D'Alessandro is the ranking Democrat serving on the Senate Finance Committee, and I can tell you he has been putting in incredible hours trying to craft a budget. Now, just to put this all go back a little bit to the development of the budget. We in New Hampshire have a two-year terms in our legislature. The first year of those 2-year terms, the first session year, is very much taken up with crafting the state budget, which is a 2-year budget that'll start on June 30th and go through to July 1st, 2 years after that. And typically, the budget process is the governor submits a budget, which Governor Sununu did shortly after his taking office. It was quite a task for him, but he did get a budget submitted. And then typically, the House of Representatives crafts their own budget, sometimes taking things from the governor's budget, sometimes not.
You say typically, Bob. You
Well,
mean like
it's-
every time?
Every time, except this year, the House could not agree on a budget, just could not agree on any budget at all, which meant that if we were not going to default to the governor's budget entirely, it was up to the Senate to craft a budget, the 24 members of the Senate. 400 members of the House couldn't do it.
Which is why Senator D'Alessandro was working so hard. Usually
Which is
they
why
have
he's
something to work
working
with.
so hard. Now, as this budget has been getting finalized in the Senate, it does appear that they have been taking account of the House positions, even though we didn't pass a budget, but they've been taking care of the House positions. Now, those of us that are Democrats in the House, paying attention to our finance people, including Bob Walsh from Manchester, who's the only member of the House Democratic Caucus to serve on the Finance Committee, which is a big commitment. And thank you, Bob, for all you do in that. They knew what we wanted. And there were some movements towards some of the things we wanted. We wanted to make sure we ended the disability wait list. We wanted to make sure we upped our funding for dealing with the opioid crisis. We wanted to make sure we were going to deal with the crisis at the Department of Children's Services at DCYF and a number of other things. And it looked like some of those things were going to get addressed, but there were a lot of things that were not being funded. So this budget bill is going to come back to us this coming Thursday, week from tomorrow, for a final vote. And we were thinking we would have some influence here, because the Republican Party, as you all know in Concord and perhaps elsewhere, but really in Concord, is badly split.
Which is why they couldn't come up with their own budget in the first place.
They couldn't come up with their own budget in the first place.
It was the factions.
We
within
did
the
not.
party.
We did not have the votes to stop their budget, but there were a bunch of very extremely conservative Republicans, libertarians, Freedom Caucus people, if you will, that would not vote for this budget, because although this budget called for no new taxes, in fact, it calls for another cut in business taxes, following the cuts made in the last biennium. Although that was
because
the case.
businessmen are clamoring for tax cuts.
Yeah,
That's
right.
what you hear when you go to business forums is we've got all the labor force we need. It's these tax cuts that are killing
it's
us.
the tax cuts that are killing us.
I'm being ironic, folks.
You
It's
are
the
being
exact
ironic.
opposite
It's
of
the
that.
exact opposite. Nonetheless, the Senate crafted this budget with no new taxes or revenues of any kind, because the revenues have been coming in really strong. Business has been good. You go out and around, you see nothing but for workers needed, hiring, apply here. You see that everywhere. And we don't have the people to fill all the jobs that we have available, which is the downside of having the lowest unemployment rate in the country, which is overall a good thing, but sometimes it's a bad thing. Well, we're being told it's time for our break, and so maybe we better take that now. I'll get on to this a little bit more when we come in the other side of the break. And again, please call in and talk to us about any issue. We're going to get on to some of the city issues, because
Yep,
we had
city
big
just
news.
did their,
Big news with the city's budget at the
Just
Board of
yesterday.
Mayor and Alderman last night. So we'll be right back, folks. 640-3091. Hey, we're back with this, our second segment of the progress report for this Flag Day, June 14th, in the great city of Manchester. And we've talked a bit about that, and we've had an interesting, the POTUS report on the progress report. If you missed that, watch the rerun. It was really good. And I was moving into the state budget, which is coming down to the crunch right now. We're up to supposedly having a vote on the state budget a week from tomorrow, Thursday, and we're waiting to see the final result that comes out of the Senate. But I was saying the Senate budget, although it contains no new taxes, indeed it now is going to include a couple of tax cuts from the business side. And the Democrats, although it funds some things that we want, it leaves other things unfunded that we very much want, and it leaves a commitment the governor had to full-day kindergarten kind of in limbo, whether that's going to be funded through the Keno option that has now passed the House and is going to be, that's going to be a local option. Whether you are able to play Keno in Manchester, you're going to have a vote of the city
Can
government.
I interrupt? I know that you're on a long road to, describe this budget, but I really would love it if you could give me a quick synopsis of this Keno for kindergarten thing. I'm not sure, how's that going to work? Do the towns that accept Keno get the money for their kindergartens? Does Keno statewide fund kindergarten statewide? Could it be a situation where only Hampton has Keno and they're picking up the tab for everybody's kindergarten? How's that going to work?
I'm not sure I got this right, but I think the idea is this Keno will go to help fund kindergarten in all the communities that don't have kindergarten now.
So it won't help Manchester?
Well, it would help, no, I'm sorry, it would help Manchester,
Okay.
I think. But what if no communities decide to opt to offer Keno? Then the funding won't be there. I don't know. I mean, there's
You know what I don't know, Bob? I don't know what Keno is. I have no idea what Keno is.
Oh, you've never been down to Mass and played Keno?
I have never been involved in a game of Keno knowingly in my life. I have no idea what this is.
Well, we'll have
I
to-
understand it's a tabletop thing
We'll
at
have
a
to-
bar or something?
Yes. Any place that pours is going to be able, if the community votes for it.
no kidding. Oh,
This
that's
has
just what
to
we
be
need.
authorized by the local. But any place that pours can offer Keno.
I feel like I might be against this thing, but I don't know what
It's
it is.
sort of electronic bingo. You pick a number of numbers, and the more numbers you pick that get matched, the bigger your payoff is. If you pick one number and they only pick that number, you get a very small payoff. But on the grid, I forget how many numbers there are, but if you pick enough, and you can make some money. But of course, more people lose than make money. Otherwise, this whole thing
That's
doesn't
why
work to
it's
raise
done,
money.
correct,
It's
yeah.
the same thing with slots and every other kind of game.
Oh, well.
You have to be in the minority to win this, because the majority got to lose, because the House is always going to win, whether the House is the state of New Hampshire or if Manchester adopted Keno, the city of Manchester.
I try to
anything
pay
like
attention, Bob, but that one got right by me.
that. And this would be Massachusetts has Keno.
Do they?
And apparently their biggest Keno producers are the border towns with New Hampshire.
I see what they're trying to do.
You'll be shocked to
Yeah.
hear that, right? You'll be shocked to hear that. And we should take a trip down to Salisbury or someplace.
You can show me the ropes,
And
Bob.
we can go down and play Keno. And the games are continuous.
you.
As soon as one game is over, another one starts up. So it can be pretty addictive, and not as bad as slots, I don't think.
Now, does this Keno bill have the same kind of reserve for addiction
Yes,
counseling and
yes.
the usual package that they provide when they are trying to foist gambling upon them?
Yes, I believe that's correct. There's some funds set aside for the town that hosts it. So, that's an incentive, even though some of the money is supposed to go to help kindergarten funding throughout the state, I believe.
A lot of hands in the till, I
A
feel.
lot of hands in the till, right? And, whether it'll produce the money we want or not. But Manchester cared a lot about this full-time kindergarten. The governor committed to it, something that all the Democrats agree with him on, that every community should offer.
It impacted
full-day
our budget.
And, we were looking at a minimum of $2 million because Manchester School District, of course, does offer full-day kindergarten.
Right.
We have a lot of
Tell
strengths in
that
our
to
school district.
the Manchester State reps that voted against paying for
Right.
full-day kindergarten.
Right.
We have full-day kindergarten, we pay for it.
And one of our reps, at least one of our reps, I think two, but one, voted against the funding for full-day kindergarten, which would have meant at least $2 million for Manchester.
Maybe we ought to send the bill to them.
We ought to send the bill.
$1
to
million apiece, they could pay us back.
I think so. So we've got that. Now, the other thing that's happening with the budget, and Lou D'Alessandro, if he was here, would be much more knowledgeable about this.
Than
but
me.
Than you or me. And that is, he feels...
I hear
and
what you're
and
saying. I see what you're
And he
doing
wrote
there,
an
Bob.
op-ed in the Union Leader against Gary Daniels, who's the Republican and head of the Senate Finance, that he thinks we're being much too lowballing the revenue estimates, that the revenues have been so strong because business is good in the state of New Hampshire. He thinks we're leaving $20 million on the table. So, and that's just from the revenue estimates in his opinion, and he's done this a long time with good track record, being too low. And if we did that, we could fund the things that the Democrats think need to be funded.
So, Bob, let me interrupt you again. I keep doing this, but let's assume that the budget that we're talking about, with the lack of funding for the things that you believe we need,
Yep.
let's assume that gets passed and revenue does come in as Senator D'Alessandro expects. That's going to provide for coffers full of funding. Now, cannot adjustments be made after the fact? Or what happens to that money? Does it go in the rainy day fund?
I think it goes in the rainy day fund, which is, not, maybe does get every last dollar we'd like in it, but it's a lot more robust than it used to be during times when business
in
revenues
08.
were not so flush. So we have bumped that up. So we don't know what's going to happen with all this, but there's an interesting political dynamic here. It was clear from what happened in the House with the budget that the regular Republicans, the Speaker and his people, for example, Speaker Jasper, they could not put the House budget through that was approved by the House Finance Committee.
We saw that
And
with
they-
our experience.
They could not do it, and they just kind of, in my opinion, they meekly gave up. And we were standing there ready to offer our votes in exchange for something.
I heard, knocking on the door.
Knocking on the
asking for
door.
a chance to weigh in.
You want to have some help? We got some votes here, folks. Come over and talk to us. But they never did. Now it looks like the same thing is happening when this Senate bill comes over to us. The Speaker and his supporters have a choice. They could come to the Democrats and say, if we give you one or two things, maybe it's a little more funding for the dealing with the opioid crisis, or a little more funding for I don't know, any number of other things, DCYF to increase the social workers available to help with these abused children cases, which is such a tragedy, and the wait times and for people in mental health crisis and emergency rooms, those sort of things. They could come to us and talk about that. But it seems like they want to go the other way and try and placate the extreme right-wingers that think the budget is too big, is too large.
Are you surprised by that, Bob?
I am not.
I'm
I'm
not either,
disappointed,
not
but
for a
I'm
second.
surprised, and I think the dynamic behind here is the Republicans are desperately worried about being primaried
By that minority in their caucus?
Yeah, by that minority in their caucus and their supporters, which include such Koch brothers funded organizations as Americans for Prosperity. I had a good friend on our committee, Science, Technology, and Energy, Jim Devine from down in Hudson, and they primaried him successfully. They sent out 7 pieces of beautifully produced full color ads attacking him. And he was a conservative Republican. I'm saying he was not voting with the Democrats on much, but he wasn't conservative enough for them, and they took him down. And they almost took down the Speaker, because Speaker Jasper, who's also from Hudson, same town, came in 8th out of 11. They have just one district down there. They have 11 representatives, and he came in 8th as the incumbent Speaker. So this is what's driving, I think, the Republicans to swing toward the extreme right wing. The wing that says you got to cut government all the time, regardless of the needs of the people, rather than to deal with the Democrats who have a 162-member caucus that could
But Bob,
put this over.
Republicans vote for these people. If the Republicans have a primary and that person who comes to the primary ends up winning, that's what the Republicans want.
Well,
So the idea is beat them. in the election.
Yeah.
Correct?
So that's correct.
And if we didn't beat them in the election, it's kind of hard to complain that we're not getting the budget that we want.
But
we
we would-
need the people who are watching this show
Yeah.
to either, either they don't agree with us, or they just agree with us but not strong enough to get out and vote.
Well, true enough in a global overview, but it has an awful lot to do with who decides to vote. We don't have a lot of voting on off-year elections. We just had a very important primary election here in Manchester and surrounding towns for the nominee for Senate District 16, which is Manchester 1, 2, and 12 wards, and Candia, Hooksett, Dunbarton, and Bow. And we had a decisive victory there by Kevin Kavanaugh, the Ward 1 alderman, who beat another very good guy, Jim
I think he surprised
Norman.
a lot of people.
Surprised them, but
the comments I've heard, people were very surprised.
You look at the vote totals; they were very low. They were very low, and everybody knew it was going to be that case. In Candia, which was the one town that Jim Norman won, there was, I think, less than 100 votes in the whole town. And I think in Ward 12 there were like maybe 300 votes out of 3,000 voters. I mean, so when the voting totals are so low, yeah, the people speak, but it's only a few people that speak for everybody else. And when you're working this with these resources that people like Americans for Prosperity and
Now,
their
let me tell
allies
you,
can throw into this.
if they throw $5,000 at a state rep campaign, that's a lot of money
That's
for a state
a lot
rep campaign.
of money, That's
And it's
way
nothing
more
for them. These are
Nothing
people
for
that
them.
these are people that are easily, cutting multi-thousands of dollar checks and more to the larger candidates. So
Yeah, that
I
is
understand what
exactly
you're
right.
saying. Their ability to influence a local race here in New Hampshire is highly leveraged,
Yep.
which is why they seek to do it here.
That's
we've
exactly
kind of been
right.
identified by that wing of the party, but I don't believe that New Hampshire Republicans are that type of Republican in the main. And I just think that in the end, common sense, even on the wrong side of the political aisle,
Yeah.
is going to have to prevail. But if it doesn't, Bob, the job of Democrats is to defeat that.
Yes.
And it would seem to me that an extremist Republican should be easier to defeat than a more moderate Republican who might be closer politically to the Democrat running against them. But yet, in certain elections, these very extreme Republicans clobber Democrats.
Yeah.
So
that's
we've got to
true.
figure out what's going on there. And I think the New Hampshire Democratic Party and Chairman Buckley might have an idea of what's going on there. But I don't know if they have the national support that we need.
Well, I certainly hope so, because, I ran for office last time really thinking we had an excellent chance to get the majority so we could get some things done.
Yeah, you thought Hillary Clinton was going to win too, Bob. I mean,
Well, I did.
everybody was wrong last time.
Everybody was wrong last time, and we're paying. In my opinion, we're paying an awful price for not being right and having the candidates we wanted in office. I mean, for this time, for the first time in 12 years, we have a Republican governor. So the things that the general court may do that previously would be stopped by the governor's office under Maggie Hassan and Jean Shaheen and John Lynch no longer will be stopped, and we're going to see some really important changes that I think are going to be tough for a lot of people to accept. But that's, elections have consequences.
We had Mel Thompson as our governor for years and years, and all of those decades of, one-party rule in the legislature in both houses. And, we made it this far.
Yeah.
And, Democrats really, when we were able to take the House those few times recently, we made a lot of progress.
We
That
made
has
a lot
not
of
been all
progress.
undone.
Yeah.
There have been efforts to undo it, but it's not been all undone.
Yeah.
Because it's been popular.
Now, the last thing I might say on the state budget, which is something that affects if Lou D'Alessandro here would strongly second this, the state budget affects everybody in this state because we all need state services of some time. Health and Human Services, runs our Medicaid program, and I mean, everywhere you look, the influence of the state budget is at work in the lives of the residents and citizens of the state of New Hampshire.
The weakest among us too, Bob. When
And
you
the
think
weakest
about
among
it,
us.
you're talking about
Yeah.
crises in foster care, crisis in state children in state
Yeah.
custody, crisis in mental health care, state. I mean, these are the weakest people who deserve the best, and they're not getting it from the state of New Hampshire.
That's right.
And I haven't seen a lot of people shown the door in that department, and I am appalled at that.
Well, there's been some. The lady who was in charge of the Children's Youth Services, did resign certainly before she was going to come to the end
And
of
she
it.
was the entire problem,
Yeah, right.
and the problem is now fixed. I
Yeah.
doubt it.
Yeah, it's a problem, and we have problems with, as I say, our mental health program, which was once very highly rated when we emptied out the state hospital, which was a big warehouse, back in the 60s and early 70s,
Well, I might-
and went to community-based health care. We had
And
a
then didn't
strong
fund the
program,
communities.
and then we didn't fund it, and now it's a real problem for so many people who are in a crisis situation. And we wouldn't put it up if it was physical problems, because it's mental problems. Somehow it's not as critical to deal with, which is a shame. But the one other thing I wanted to say, our state budget, our biennium budget, a tremendous part of that budget comes through federal funding. I mean, there's whole departments that get their entire funding through federal programs.
You have a problem with that?
Not if the federal government continues to support them.
I mean, we're sending the money down there. It's got to come back
We're
here,
sending
right?
the money down there. It should come back here. But this is where the budget that was proposed by President Trump is totally alarming, because he voted to zero out program after program in all going to the states, including New Hampshire, on which we depend, and where we're not ready to make up the gap with state funds. And
Will the Democrats let the people know that the Republicans are doing this to them?
I think so.
Will this be turned into a political issue that we can talk about in the next election, Bob?
I think
That's
it
the
will.
argument that I've been talking about today. We've got to let people know that when your grandmother had an adult daycare center to go to last week but doesn't next week, that's the Democrats brought that daycare center to you, and the Republicans took it away. People got to understand that.
Right.
Now, there are
Exactly.
people who say, I don't want to pay for somebody else's grandmother.
Yeah.
Well, you know what?
Yeah. Right. I think it's called.
4 or
Am I
5
my
sentences
brother's
just I can't say them. But you don't want to pay for someone else's grandmother. Then
Yeah.
is that the best of New Hampshire? Is that the New Hampshire citizen that we consider the best? The guy that doesn't want to pay for another kid to go to school, guy that
Yeah.
doesn't want to chip in.
I've heard people say exactly that. I don't
Me
need kids
too.
in school. Why should I pay property
Yeah.
taxes to support somebody else's kids
Yeah.
getting an education?
I think that those people should be put off in the woods by themselves where they want to be. Want to be alone? Go out there.
Well, I think maybe I guess it's time for our next break. We can do that. I think we ought to come back and talk a little bit about the city budget, which, was a subject of some critical votes last night in the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. I wish we had Alderman Long here, or another Alderman, to talk about it with us right now, but we'll talk about it ourselves. And again, I hope we'll get a call or two to
Yeah,
deal
help
with
us
this.
out. I'm getting all fired up. I got to calm down. I'm going to take a pout of this break and calm down a little bit.
Okay. We'll be right back, folks, with the final segment of this week's progress report. Okay, everybody, this is going to be our final segment. I don't know how many people are out there. Mike suggests everybody's out grilling or enjoying this absolutely lovely, magical evening in
really
June.
spectacular. We've had such lousy weather, Bob, and then the heat wave, which
And the heat
I
wave
didn't
was
mind.
pretty
It
awful.
was, it's better than the rain and garbage that we've been having. But these past 2 days have been real great New Hampshire weather.
So we don't have a real expert here on the city's budget, but I just want to make mention of a few things. It was very noteworthy to me to read in the paper today that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen managed to get the tax cap override done by the absolute minimum number of votes with Joe Kelly and Keith Hirschman, the Ward 12 Alderman. Joe Kelly, Alderman at large.
Joe Kelly isn't his name. His name's Joe Lavasser.
Joe Kelly Lasser.
Yeah, I guess he did. He did legally change it, I guess. Okay.
Did he?
I don't know. There was some ballot thing. He had to do something to get on the ballot the first
In
time.
any way, I was very pleased to see that they did give the school district the minimum amount that our new superintendent, Dr. Borges, said that they absolutely had to have.
And he
So,
specifically said it would go toward reducing class sizes, which has been a
A big
real
thing,
issue
yeah.
here. I mean, there's a lot of issues in the schools, lack of programs, lack of language teaching. There's a lot of problems that
Yep.
if only we had the willpower to dedicate the funding, we really could have. We've got the infrastructure, and it's
Yeah.
really just kind of idling. It's running in first gear.
yeah. And we've often said, so you're probably all tired of hearing it, and I think most people agree with it, that our schools are absolutely vital to the success of this city. Because if people don't want to come and live here because they don't think our schools are going to provide the quality of education they want, we're losing out on so many things.
Let me jump in here, Bob. On Monday, I attended the 5th grade graduation at Northwest Elementary School
Oh,
for the
did
kids
you?
that are going to be moving up into the middle school. Most of them, I guess, will go to Goslar. Holy cow! This was a little 5th grade graduation. Those kids, they put on a jazz presentation, a medley of jazz songs. They had music awards. They had reading awards. Spectacular group of kids. Now that school's been overcrowded since my kids went to that
Yeah, it
school.
still
That's
is.
been overcrowded. I think when they opened the doors, it was bursting at the seams. But they have such an amazing group of dedicated teachers, counselors, paraprofessionals, and administrators, which I'm sure is replicated throughout the city, that they do so much with so little. And the education experience that those 5th graders have had for these 5 years has set them up to want to learn. And folks, you may say, oh, well, then that means we're doing great. We're not doing great. These people are threading needles to get the job done.
Yeah.
But I have to just rejoice in how much they do with what little we give them to work with.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many great stories about the Manchester schools, and one of the people I really admire is my fellow Ward 12 resident rep and school committee member Connie Van Houten. 'Cause
She's a good one.
she's a good one. She's not afraid of controversy. For
Yeah,
sure.
you keep an eye out and watch her on at the meetings. I mean, she's a driver.
She's making a good point to make known the way she can, and she does it through this vehicle that we're on right now, MCTV, the successes and the great successes of the Manchester school districts, the innovations. We now have the Manchester School of Technology, our 4th high school.
I was at their graduation earlier in the month too.
Really?
They recognized over half the class had competed in state or national competitions at the top level.
Wow.
Every single student graduating in the graduating class this year had a GPA of 3.0 or better. Every single graduating student.
That's great. And
And again, doing more with less. They don't have a gym. They walk
Yeah.
around the building for their gym class. Those kids are missing out. They're getting a great education, but they're not getting what you and I got when we went to the
Right.
to the high schools,
Right.
and they deserve more. And they should have funded that expansion over at that school.
yeah, well, that's great. That's great.
Sorry, I keep interrupting.
No, that's a very much on point. But I do think it's time for us to tell, as Connie Van Houten does every chance she gets, the successes that we achieve, the achievements and the successes in the Manchester School District. And nobody should be hesitant about having their kid go to a Manchester school, because I think the schools are doing an absolutely wonderful job with very limited resources in many cases. And it's a really good thing. We got a great guy running for school committee. I want to put in a plug for David Scannell, longtime educator here in Manchester. He's running to be in the school committees now, teaching in the Milford school system. But I think he would be an absolute great member of the
He
school
knows his
committee.
way around. He's worked in the administration. He actually, I think he was a communications guy, so he understands messaging.
Yep.
He understands how the school system works, and I think he's going to run a good campaign. I think he'd make a good school board member.
Yeah. Okay, there's one other thing I thought I might just bring up here. We got a little time left, and that is something that I was a subject of an editorial in the Union Leader this morning, and that has to do with a bill out of our committee, Science, Technology, and Energy, that I worked very hard on with many other people. The only bill we passed in this entire session that, in my opinion, advanced our energy goals, and our energy goals include advancing renewable energy to a point where it's 25% of our bulk supply
25 by 25,
by
right?
the year 2025. We set that for a goal. It's still our goal. And there was a bill that came up to up our solar cap modestly from 0.3% to 1%. Pretty small, but that was
That's more than triple.
it's more than triple.
Holy cow!
Well, the bill as it
Can we
finally
handle
passed
it?
got back down
Could
to
we handle 1%, Bob?
0.7%.
Oh my goodness!
And then there's the biomass, the wood industry, which is such an important part of New Hampshire, not perhaps right within the city limits of Manchester, but not just in the North Country, throughout the state. There are plenty of people involved in harvesting the wood we have in our heavily forested state.
I think there's a biomass plant up at the Department of Safety in Concord, isn't there? Right in the back of the building.
Is there?
A very small one, yeah.
Eh.
I could be wrong. I thought I saw that when I drove by there.
Well, we have 6 biomass plants, wood-burning power plants. One has now closed, perhaps temporarily, perhaps not, the one in Alexandria. So we know these folks are in a very tenuous position about continuing to provide a market for the low-grade wood that comes out of our forestry operations, a market that's very important to the forestry, whether it's the guys that cut the timber or haul it.
And that's the junk, the underbrush, the limbs, the
underbrush,
branches.
stuff you can't use for furniture or veneer, high quality. It's the stuff that you want to have a market for so you can maintain proper forestry practices. Well, this bill went through the Senate by I think perhaps even unanimously on a voice vote, came to the House, and we passed it out of committee on a strong vote, only 4 dissenting votes. It went to the floor, and there was a tabling motion. And the man making the tabling motion means that you just vote whether to put it on the table, and there's no vote on the bill.
You can't debate it, you can't talk
Can't
about
debate
it,
it.
you just take the vote
You just have to
immediately.
take the vote. But the tabling motion was defeated, but the representative who brought that forward, Representative Harrington, who just thought it was too expensive for the ratepayers to pay for the sustenance of this industry, said the governor doesn't like this bill. Well, turns out he may be right. We are waiting to see if the governor is going to veto this bill. And there was an editorial in the Union Leader today urging that the governor veto this bill. Now, there is some cost in electric rates to pay for the contracts by which these people get to provide their power to the grid. For the solar part of it, on a typical bill, it's 7 cents a month. So, big deal, right? You can't get a stick of chewing gum for 7 cents.
Bob, I've seen people argue that they don't want their taxes to go up 7 cents a month, to pay for extra cops. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't surprise me.
Well, that's I guess that's why we're having a debate.
To me, I'd pay 14 to help out my neighbor.
Yeah.
But
But the other thing that
I'd
point
pay 14 cents. Bob.
the other point I wanted to make about this modest increase in our commitment to solar capacity is people have the idea that if you put solar in your house, and a lot of people are, all around Manchester, all around the state, a lot of people are going for solar because it helps them with their energy costs, and it certainly helps in non-energy impacts like reducing carbon pollution, all of that. But it does help with the energy bills, and it helps control your own fate. But what people don't understand is that all this solar helps everybody. Everybody, whether you put solar panels on your roof or not. Now, how can that be? Well, here's how it can be, folks.
Peak generation times?
Peak generation. Back in the day, there was a time when the peak demand was in the winter, when we had a lot more electric heat and not so much air conditioning. That was the peak. But for at least 20 years, the peak in all of New England, including New Hampshire, has been in the summer when it's really hot. You know, those heat wave days in August. And that's when the sun is shining and when your solar is doing its best. And when
Disagree. Solar panels are more efficient in the cold.
Well, they are.
We
they are-
get sunshine in the cold, too.
They are thermodynamically more important, but you're going to
I
get,
have to make that point, though.
but you know, you're going to get more bulk power from the sun.
I
at
concede the
peak.
point.
But you're absolutely right to make that point. Solar works very well.
People say, well, we have long winters, so solar
Yeah,
doesn't work in New Hampshire. That's absolutely
Absolutely
false.
untrue.
It's not true.
So even though the opponents say solar power is intermittent because the sun doesn't shine all the time, but when it's the peak time, the sun's going to be shining. It's going to be plenty of light, and then those solar things can knock down the peak. Now that helps in a couple of ways.
They don't have to bring the big
They
polluting
don't have
plants
to bring
online.
on the most expensive, most polluting sources of power, which might be an oil-fired plant, for example, or it could be well, there aren't many left, coal plant, which don't operate very much. They could bring those on, and it increases cost for everybody. To the extent those can be backed down and not brought online, we're all going to benefit. And the other way it helps is by knocking down the peak. It knocks down the percentage that New Hampshire has to contribute to regional transmission projects, which are federally regulated. And we spent billions on increasing our transmission in New England to relieve congestion where there wasn't adequate transmission. We spent billions on it. And New Hampshire gets allocated its share of a transmission project that's deemed necessary for reliability. And this is federally regulated. New Hampshire gets its share figured out by its share of the peak demand. We knock down our peak demand. We knock down the amount that we have to kick in
For the project in
for the
Connecticut.
regional projects that are in Connecticut or
project in Maine, or-
Massachusetts or wherever, Vermont or Maine. So solar works for us very, very well, even if you don't yourself have solar on your house or don't have a good location for solar. And the costs continue to go down. So we're waiting to see if the governor is going to veto this bill. The BIA is opposed to it, representing, they call themselves, the Chamber of Commerce for the industry, business and industry. Of
Yeah,
New
but they're
Hampshire.
a real knee-jerk operation. They don't really analyze. I've read some of their responses to
Yeah.
proposed legislation, and a lot of it is pretty boilerplate ideology as opposed to
Exactly,
point-by-point
exactly.
analysis of a particular bill.
So, there we are, and we're waiting to see if the governor will sign or veto this bill or let it pass without his signature. Now, the Senate Republicans who are in favor of this gave the governor something. They just gave him another tax repeal, the electricity consumption tax, which is a small
But we
tax.
can't talk about that because we're out of time.
Oh, okay,
Time to wrap up.
okay.
I guess we're not going to have a guest.
I guess we're not going to have a guest.
Our viewers had to put up with us, but
So I hope, folks, this was okay. We're sorry our guest did not appear. We'll find out why. And maybe we'll have him back, but if he doesn't have a
We'll
good
take care of
excuse,
him.
we probably won't. So thanks, folks. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Progress Report. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. Enjoy this beautiful evening.
tune in next week, folks.